For most of us, there are no guarantees.
Yes, we just had on a few weeks ago, but it was so fascinating and so infuriating to hear a real story of what Americans are being put through in the name of justice, oddly enough, regarding January 6th. And it's a harbinger for all of us as American citizens. If they can do that to this guy, they certainly could do it to any one of us, and they can make up anything they want to make up to justify the injustices that have been done to the January 6th protesters, the people that were there at the Capitol, not the people who were violent or doing anything that amounted to any kind of harm to Congress or the Capitol Police or anyone else. Yet many were arrested and spent a lot of time in jail, being denied their rights to see their attorney, to see the evidence before they went to trial. One of those people is with us again, Tim Hale, 33-year-old Army Reserve veteran, recently released after being in jail for nearly 3 years. The big charge, the big kahuna, was obstruction of official proceeding, the only felony charge, part of the 1512 Section C2, being reviewed by the Supreme Court right now. And to give us an update on what's going on and video that is still being released from January 6th that you and I have not seen, haven't been able to see because they've been hiding it from us, is the aforementioned Tim Hale. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. I wanted to bring light to something you may or may not know about. It doesn't involve you directly, but another one of the January 6th protesters who was given a misdemeanor charge of parading at the Capitol. See, now, when I was a kid, the only bad thing about parades is they didn't throw out the right kind of candy. I don't know what kind of charge parading is. I understand it's a misdemeanor. And a gentleman who's a 53-year-old truck driver named James Little was arrested, and he beat the charges in court after being sentenced to 6. And anyway, because the judge didn't like the fact that I guess he beat the charges, he sentenced him to another 60 days in jail. I don't know if you've heard about his case or not, Tim, but do you know anything about the man I'm talking about?
I honestly, no. That's a new one for me. I know that there's something to be said about these sentences that are being handed out. I mean, that actually is a new one to me. I try to keep up with some of these cases, and there's so many bizarre ones. I mean, there's a guy named Jeremy.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.
He tried to raise money so he could pay for a lawyer, and the government didn't like that he was raising money to pay for the lawyer. So the government had the court freeze the fundraiser he set up, so he couldn't pay for a new lawyer. So I mean, that's how despicable it really is.
You have the right to a defense of the charges against you, so therefore they were restricting his ability to even defend himself, which has happened time and time again, as you described to us a few weeks back, that not allowing you to see the evidence against you so you can prepare for trial and having such limited access to your attorney. All of these things are illegal, and yet the government is using all kinds of obfuscated reasons to keep the defendants of January 6th from these specifically, and that's another example. So anyway, Tim, this is what I was going to tell you here, if I can pull this. James Little, and this is from Tim Rivers, the author of the American Gulag Chronicles, Letters from Prison. I don't know if you're familiar with Tim at all. I know you've been working with the Patriot Freedom Project, and they have helped you, people like Ed Martin, who's a fantastic attorney. But Here's the deal of James Little. Apparently, the judge did not like the fact that he was unremorseful, according to this story from the Washington Times, I believe. And the judge in his case was a man named Royce C. Lamberth.
Oh, yeah. Lamberth.
You're familiar with Lamberth.
He's one of the major ones. And let me just say this, like, there are a lot of district judges, but it seems like with January 6 cases, it's always like the same 20 or so judges who get all of the cases. It's very interesting, but please continue. Selective justice. Okay. Which we've seen a lot of in this country over the last, and continue to see it. But anyway, he said last Thursday, he was worried about further danger to our country because of Little and other shameless attempts to misinterpret or misrepresent what happened on January 6, 2021. Well, his audience was just Little, the 53-year-old North Carolina truck driver. The judge also alluded to comments made by Republican lawmakers, including what he called a preposterous statement from Representative Elise Stefanik calling January 6 defendants hostages. Would you say that you were more of a hostage than a prisoner in the time you were in, Tim? Yeah, I would say that because, something that's interesting with hostages, I think, is that, typically they're not really held for real reasons that would, be justice. So for instance, one thing I noticed when going through case law is that these judges keep using the term insurrection, even though it's been 3 years and they know it wasn't an insurrection and no one's been charged with it. So, I mean, that's kind of the same thing here. It's like the letter of the law doesn't mean anything. And it's like, why spend, it's just interesting. Like, you spend all this time reading case law, and what's the point if they're going to make up their own rules and you completely ignore the case law?
Right.
Here's another like really ridiculous example. There was a woman I crossed paths with a couple times in the Capitol building. Her name was Caitlin Bartow, and she's like this cowgirl from out west. She got a couple of misdemeanors, and it's been 3 years. So she's supposed to be sentenced, I think, next week. And she did nothing. She's on video. I have video of her. I posted it. She's picking up garbage and putting it in garbage bags. She gave a speech. And I mentioned this in my trial too. And it's like, it's on the record. I don't understand why people the building was not inside. The building was not anywhere near as violent as outside. People were just wandering around. So she gave a speech basically inside what's called the Capitol Visitor Center. And she completely talked down a crowd of people that were angry that the cops were hurting people. And so actually the cops and the crowd. And then on our way out, you can see me and her, because they're sending us out a window, the Capitol Police, you can see us yelling to people, stop breaking the S word, stop breaking stuff. So, I mean, it's like this woman, as well as her brother, there's no reason they should have even been prosecuted, let alone stupid misdemeanors and then hold them hostage for 3 years. I mean, they're out on bond, but just why even wasting resources prosecuting these people? It's really just pardon the phrase, a body count,
Sure. And the more they can add on to that group and make it seem like it was an ominous group of people trying to overtake the U.S. government, the more they can add on, the more it contributes to their insurrectionist narrative, the drumbeat that has been going on for the last 3 years after January 6, 2021. Now, the video that you're talking about trying to get it released, do you remember all of the uproar when Tucker Carlson just released just a portion of the video that he had gotten, released just a portion, and oddly enough, a week later, Tucker Carlson wasn't on Fox News anymore. I find that kind of odd, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was in prison at the time, but I'll say this, there's one thing sex offenders love watching in prison, and it's Fox News, so I saw that on TV all the time. So I happened to notice when all the child molesters weren't watching Fox, where they were watching Fox News, there was a different host on. So I was like, okay, that's cool, interesting. Wonder why that is. I have mixed feelings about that, because I'm a little salty that McCarthy didn't give Tucker more to release. But yeah, it is interesting. Like, as soon as they see a little bit of video that contradicts their narrative, they start losing their minds. And it's like CNN and all these like fake news sites, they're the ones they were the ones playing the same 20-second clips for 3 years. Suddenly you see a little bit of video that says, well, actually, maybe it was a mostly peaceful protest, quote unquote. And then suddenly, yeah, people start freaking out.
Yeah, you know what? We didn't have a federal push by the Department of Justice to arrest en masse Black Lives Matter and Antifa protesters who were doing serious damage, not only to property, federal property, but to just common everyday citizens who are just trying to mind their own business and live their lives. And all of that, the Democrats, Kamala Harris famously was funding bail for BLM protesters and Antifa protesters because they were a fundraising arm of the Democrat Party, which we found out, in the middle of all of that chaos in 2020. And famously, there's an old song by the group Fix from 1980-something, 83, says one thing leads to another. And certainly the unrest of 2020 led to further mayhem in 2021, but that mayhem was not being caused mainly by January 6th protesters. It was being caused by the federal government in cahoots with the Department of Justice and Capitol Police. Don't you think that that's a good ascertainment of what transpired there?
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, I don't want to take credit for everything, too. Like, there's a guy on Twitter as well. He goes by Free State Will. It's Will Pope. He's another defendant. He's pro se. I mean, he posts so much video confirming that. I mean, yeah, Antifa was there, and I don't want to, discount that Antifa were agitators at the Capitol. We found a lot of them, and I was in jail with some of them. But, they're also, straight-up federal agents, people who are connected to three-letter agencies. We call them the Fed Brigade. And he has a lot of video showing them talking about it and bragging about it that day. So there are all kinds of people connected to the Defense Intelligence Agency, all kinds, like FBI, CIA, all these people were there. There's even video of, in uniform officers from the BOP, Bureau of Prisons, that were called up for backup that day, who are up there on video trying to stay out of sight because it's bad optics. So, I mean, every three-letter agency you can think of, we know they were there to incite January 6th. It's just a matter of the government refusing to acknowledge it or the media to acknowledge it. But, I mean, more to the point, you really gotta think about this. They were just occupying Congress not too long ago over that over the
Gaza
stuff
thing
with the Middle East.
Yeah.
I mean, this is look. There's two ways to look at this. In terms of protests and in terms of riots, riots aren't new in America. I mean, it's sorry to say that, but they're just not. And in terms of protests, whether you want to talk about civil rights or the peace movement, anti-war, whether you want to talk about the labor movement, it used to be that the left was the ones persecuted by the feds. And so the pendulum can always swing in the other direction. This is why it's a bad precedent. But even in terms of riots, this is why Joe Biden's a terrible leader, because George Washington, John Adams, they pardoned people engaged in actual rebellions. And even Lincoln had plans to be pretty, we'll say, conciliatory during the actual Civil War. Meanwhile, a bunch of guys with flagpoles and stuff like that, it's locked them up for the rest of their lives. It makes no sense. And that just shows you that they're trying to cover something up. They're just trying to hide stuff. It's all about a narrative. It's absolutely bananas.
Well, the guy was bananas. Tim. The guy was telling you about this James Little, this truck driver from North Carolina. First sentenced by Lamberth in early 2022 to 60 days in prison and 3 years of probation after pleading guilty to illegally parading at the Capitol. But his public defenders argued prison time and probation can't be combined for a single petty misdemeanor charge. The U.S. Court of Appeals from the D.C. Circuit agreed, and this was back in August. He'd already served his time and about half his probation, so he asked to be set loose. Instead, Lambert sentenced him anew to 2 more months in prison, saying he'd shown no remorse or respect for the criminal justice system since the riot.
And you know what's interesting is, like, there's really case law. Actually, this might seem counterintuitive. It might not. You don't have to show remorse. As dumb as that might sound, like, remorse might get you a lower sentence, but according to actual case law, you don't have to show remorse if you maintain your innocence. And it's actually, like, they're really not supposed to be giving people exorbitant sentences for not showing remorse, because you already get a reduction in your sentencing guidelines when you take a plea deal. So it doesn't even make sense. None of this makes sense. And if you think about, like, there's this thing called the trial tax. So, like, I went to trial and I got a 3-point enhancement for supposedly lying on the stand, or what did they say, providing material false testimony. It's like, well, no, I didn't lie. I just testified in my defense because that's my right. But you get a 3-point enhancement if you do that, but you get a 3-point reduction if you bend the knee and take a plea deal. So there's a 6-point difference in how they grade your sentence based on whether you go to trial or you don't. And so really, you have a system of justice where these judges, like, again, it's like maybe they're not all bad. Maybe they're just part of a machine that just, like, they just can't, like, remove themselves from, psychologically to think about this objectively. But whatever the case may be, I don't want to slander all these judges, but it just seems like.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woo-hooer, a hand clapper, a high-fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino-style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.
Seriously, I think she's into you.
I don't know. I look so much older because of my hair, or lack of it.
I know how that feels.
You?
I actually lost a lot of hair at one point.
What? How'd you get it back?
I went to J6er Medical Hair Restoration.
Oh, a hair transplant.
It's the only permanent solution. Besides, I tried every other remedy imaginable. If only I'd gone to them first.
Get back in the game with J6er Medical Hair Restoration. 100 million hair grafts successfully transplanted. JairMedical.com.
We're just in a situation now where it's bend the knee or we will destroy you. And, you can't do that. You can't keep leveling someone's sentence up over misdemeanors. Most misdemeanor cases should be time served or even just get it, like, pay a fine. And like here's an example. And, it's not like the prettiest example, because, the real world, the real reality is, man, like, a growing number of Americans have criminal histories. So, there was this guy I was locked up with. He was one of the first people I met on Con Air. He's the January 6th defendant named Michael Curzio. Michael Curzio went to prison for like 7 years for first-degree attempted murder. His story it's an interesting story. I don't judge him for it based on what he's actually told me about it. It seems like he was kind of screwed by the courts, but he went to prison and he had to join a gang for his own protection.
Yeah.
So this is state prison. So, but this was a while ago. So his judge and this is one of the best judges actually, is Judge Nichols. He's the guy who actually tossed out the 1512 charge that's in the Supreme Court now.
Yeah.
But his judge initially was like, you're the worst thing in the world, and I'm not going to give you bond. But he was only given misdemeanors. And he was actually arrested in the Capitol building. He was right next to me in the Capitol Visitor Center. They arrested him right there, and they let him go that day. And then the feds raided him in Florida a week later. But they still only gave him misdemeanors. So they held him. They held him in the D.C. jail for a solid 6 months just because they wanted him to do his entire sentence. No time served. He had to do the full 6 months for the plea deal he took. And so, like, it just seems like for everybody, no matter what, there's always variations, but for every single case, there's just some, they want to get their pound of flesh somehow.
Yeah, Tim Hale, I'm sorry, I'm out of time now, but we will talk again if you're willing, okay?
I'm always willing.
All right, thank you.
I appreciate it.
It's the Nightcap on 700 WLW.